English skills. So if you're just joining us, please write your name, your organization in the chat. And we're very excited to have this conversation. English skills are workforce skills with Dr. Katie Brown from EnGen. As you're joining in, please write your name, your organization in the chat, and my colleague Megan over at Barbara Bush Foundation for Family Literacy has just put in a quick poll to get a sense about how you learned about All In and if you've ever attended learning series. So be sure to fill that out as you're coming in.
Sarah, it's possible that people can't use the chat because I
Oh,
can only write to host and panelists, so there's nothing in there yet, and it might be because there's some setting.
oh, let's fix the setting.
Yes, because there are now two comments that say the chat is disabled in the Q&A.
Okay, we'll enable the chat in one moment. Thank you everybody for fixing that. All right, we're gonna fix the chat so you'll be able to write your name and organization as you're coming in. All right, well, welcome everyone. We're gonna fix the chat so you can be part of this conversation today. I see the first person right in there. This is the 7th session of the All In Learning series, and it's been a great opportunity for us to talk to multiple organizations and providers in the field on all different topics related to adult learning. And today we're talking about a super important topic, the role of English skills in workforce development. So just to give a little bit of background about All In is the Adult Literacy and Learning Impact Network, which is convened by the Barbara Bush Foundation for Family Literacy. We work across multiple organizations in the adult learning literacy space to really collaborate and address this issue as a collective rather than compete for funding and resources and information. We really want to coordinate across our organizations to make a greater impact. And if you're, new to the topic or just joining, we want to share just a real brief snapshot of what adult literacy is like right now in our country. According to the most recent PAC data, which comes out approximately every 7 years, over 58 million adults in the United States, ages 16 to 65, so that working age population, is struggling with foundational literacy needs, reading at or below a 3rd grade reading level. Of course, you can't compare adult literacy skills with children's literacy skills to the same extent because adults come in with, so many resources and assets and life experiences that they can apply. But if you think about those discrete skills and competencies for reading, this is a major issue. And we're going to dig into that a little bit as we talk with Katie and EnGen. And that second point is really the crux of our conversation today, that 1 in 10 workers need English skills, which aligns very closely to the national skills data that shows, 92% of jobs now require digital skills. I think that study came out in 2023. It's probably 100 now. So that this is a big, big issue. In addition, we know that incarcerated individuals are also struggling with higher rates of low literacy. Importantly, and this is especially important for Barbara Bush Foundation for family literacy, thinking about this multi-generational issue, that children of parents with low literacy have a 72% chance of experiencing low literacy themselves and are more likely to live in poverty and have other impacts of low literacy. I always talk about this, but I'm an anomaly where my mom struggled with low literacy her entire life. But I was able to access those resources and, change that path for myself and my own kids, right? But that doesn't always happen. So a lot of what we're doing today is thinking, and in this work is thinking about ways to create those opportunities for learning and pathways over the lifespan. And finally, this issue affects military recruitment. It affects health, it affects national security, right? So literacy is really at the crux of all of these other issues that we're facing. Just a real quick kind of visual. About 28% of adults in the US are reading at the lowest level 1, only able to comprehend short, simple sentences, right? Adults ages 16 to 65, that working age population, but fewer than 10% are currently enrolled in education programming. And one of the goals of All In is to think about various access points to literacy and learning. So EnGen is one of those access points, right? What are the other avenues that we can put in place for people to access learning opportunities, develop their skills that are relevant to their specific learning needs? And so that's a lot of what we're trying to do as a collective. We love this slide. I'm not going to go into it in depth, but just kind of a visual representation of the fact that adult literacy impacts almost every other issue that we're dealing with as a nation, from health to building a skilled workforce. You know, workforce development is on everybody's mind, as well as national security, voter turnout, and civic engagement more broadly. Children's learning is so connected. I mean, that data point that came out from National Institute of Health still remains that the primary caregiver's education level is still the biggest indicator of a children's literacy and vocabulary outcomes, even more so than socioeconomic status and some of those other factors. And finally, we know that education and interventions while incarcerated reduce recidivism by up to 43%. That number is bonkers. It's one of the only areas that we can say there's a direct connection between intervention with education and improved outcomes. So we're really excited to talk about one of these interventions today that can be used widely for our English learner population. Finally, our work is guided and directed by what's called the National Action Plan for Adult Literacy. Many of you joining the call today may have been part of the development of that plan. If you weren't a part of it or you don't know about it, please access it and take a look at it and become a part of it. There are a lot of ways to expand access to adult literacy, and many of you are doing that work every day. But the plan kind of lays out these mutual reinforcing initiatives and ways that we can work as a country, as a collective, rather than each of us trying to address this issue on our own. And one of the kind of segues into our conversation with Dr. Katie Brown is talking about a new study that All In released, I believe it was April of this year, which is breaking barriers to adult literacy access. We surveyed 2,000 adults who are eligible for services but not enrolled to understand their needs, their perceptions of learning, their experiences, as well as what kind of learning they would be into. We found that almost all preferred more flexible hybrid online learning options. Even people with lower literacy levels are online in some capacity and thinking about ways to improve both their reading skills but also digital skills. And so that finding aligns so well with the work that Dr. Katie Brown has done and the team at EnGen to really connect, digital tools, what we know about English language acquisition, and the relevant skills that people need in their day-to-day jobs. So with that, I'm gonna introduce our guest speaker today. I've been following the work of Dr. Katie Brown for some time. We'll call her Katie, but she is amazing. I'm a super fan. So Katie is the founder and chief education officer of EnGen, and really they're on a mission to empower the multilingual workforce with English skills they need for inclusion and economic mobility. So for more than 25 years, she's been working to improve outcomes for English language learners around the world through large-scale initiatives in higher education, workforce development, public and private sectors. Katie is a real expert in adult learning, education technology, and instructional design. And that is a rare combination. A lot of people who work in ed tech don't have that education and design background. So it's great to see the product designed by people who understand language learning. So with that, I will pass it over to you, Katie, to introduce yourself and give us a little bit about EnGen. And if you're just joining, please share your name and org in the chat here, which I think is enabled now.
It is enabled. Thank you so much for being here. It's a real honor and a pleasure. And I am also a super fan of yours and all the work that you do to advocate for adult literacy. Um, EnGen is a web and mobile platform that we use to help meet the needs of adult English learners. And there is some overlap in that Venn diagram between adults in the workforce who need literacy skills and adults who are English learners. We primarily focus on the ones who are learning English as a second language, but we actually end up working with adults who have emerging literacy skills because we're so focused on making sure that adult learners are getting the English skills they need for their own real world tasks. So, the most important thing to know about what we do is that we offer personalized learning to adults at scale, either through their employers, through state sponsored initiatives, through workforce initiatives that are coming through departments of education, and we want to make sure that we enable people with the skills that are going to help them most immediately. And I actually, when I read your report, the thing that struck me the most is that adults want things that are technology enabled and available on their own time because adults pay attention to things that are interesting to them and relevant for them. And as much as we try to personalize what happens in a class, a traditional class where there's a teacher and there are many students, it's impossible to make it relevant to every learner in the class. So the best thing we can do is to build programs that are really designed around the needs of the adult learners we're serving. And that's generally a combination of something that's technology mediated with support by people around the edges. So every year, EnGen does a workforce survey. We survey all the learners we serve to find out, did the platform work for you? How did it help you? And what we found in our survey last year, where we looked at 40,000 learners and 6,000 of them responded, which is a huge, huge number, is that 84% of them said that they would remain with their current employer because English was offered as a benefit. And this ties in with what you were saying earlier, Sarah, which is that we're not meeting the needs of our adult learners. Like, we've done a great job of establishing that they need English upskilling, that this is a problem for the future of work in the United States, that we don't have people with the skills they need for the jobs we have now, but we've not done a great job of accessibility, and employers are one way to do that. So partnerships with employers, which I've seen either directly with EnGen or also through state government initiatives. We have partnerships in Maine and Colorado and Michigan, really forward-thinking state governments that are enabling small and medium-sized employers to invest in English skills. And the workers echo the benefit of doing this by saying they'll stay with their employer because they're able to access these critical literacy skills in the workplace. They'll refer their friends for the same reason. And almost 80% of the learners we served reached a career goal, like a pay raise or a promotion as a result of English upskilling.
That was so impressive to me. Thinking about measurable skills gains that we're always talking about. I mean, getting a pay raise or a promotion as a result is unbelievable. Okay, we're going to move to the next slide.
And this is just like that was a quote from a learner on the slide before. I love this because this basically talks about the employer saying the same thing. This is an employer saying by equipping employees with stronger language skills, we were able to have multiple employee referrals across departments, moving people from entry level roles into roles that have family sustaining wages, creating pathways for workers. So when the workforce development system, including employers, thinks about literacy skills as something foundational that should be part of workforce development, we can create internal career pathways and pathways to jobs because literacy is something that's just included as part of getting people job skills. Oh no, yes, the next slide is great. Um, our workers, the learners that we survey respond that they are more confident, that they save time at work. Objectively, 88% of the learners we served last year, and this is when we measured all 40,000 of them, improved their proficiency, which is amazing. Because we know that with increased proficiency and increased confidence and increased time savings at work, that we're helping people help their families. And this ends up helping not just this generation of adult workers, but also, as you pointed out earlier, it's helping their children. By investing in adult literacy skills, we help not just the adults right now who need them, we help their kids. This is a great quote from another one of our clients. We work with the Amazon Career Choice Program, and I love the part that's bolded here. Employees who have participated report increased confidence using English at work, transitioning into new roles, and accessing new career opportunities. So we hear it not just from the learners we're serving, we also hear it from their stakeholders. And so anyone who's interested in adult literacy, I think that what all of this information is doing is suggesting that we look at it as an investment. This isn't an expense. I mean, it's not an expense, but it is an expense that is an investment because if you are putting resources towards developing the literacy skills of your workforce, you are building a better workforce and it will pay you back with saved time at work, with people who are able to do jobs that you can't fill right now, with improved retention of workers. We see all of this over and over and over in both employer sponsored programs and programs that are sponsored by local governments. 90% of our workers improved their digital skills, which I think is really important for this conversation. And Sarah, you and I have had conversations about this in other panels in the past, but we're not pulling literacy out as a separate standalone thing. I think a lot of people, when they think about adult literacy, they imagine like somebody learning the alphabet and the days of the week and the animals at the zoo and using a picture book. And that's not how we teach adults. First of all, most of them have some literacy skills. They're using technology. They know how to do what they need to do in a really constrained way. So, what we need to do is expand the boundaries of what they're capable of doing by giving them increasingly complex tasks that are important for them to accomplish. Because adults don't pay attention to things that are not interesting to them. And they have a very long to do list, like we all do, of all the things we need to get done. And so, if they can use technology and improve their literacy and get more workforce skills, it's a win-win-win.
Definitely.
Um, and this is another great quote from one of our partners from ProLiteracy, which is the New Readers Press, which really works on literacy skills for adult learners. But EnGen is proven to empower adults by uplifting their English and digital literacy skills, and we're proud to partner with them in strengthening the US workforce. So we're seeing this not just from the learners we're serving, not just the employers we're serving, but also our partners in the field, that investing in English as a workforce skill is lifting up everyone. Another colleague of mine likes to say that a rising tide lifts all boats, and that's I think what we see when we put the resources into adult literacy that we need and that we can show that it's helping learners. And then this is, I think, maybe the last slide that I have here. Maybe there's another one I forget, but that 75% of workers agree that having a personalized on-demand approach is better than something that uses a more traditional classroom style. And I think this is because adults have constraints on their time, they have constraints on their schedules, they have logistical issues with elder care and childcare and transportation. And when they can do something that fits into their schedule, it works a lot better than when it's something that's like you have to go to class 3 nights a week from 7 to 9:15. And this is just another example of how investing in English skills helps with long-term education and career advancement opportunities. And this is coming from our partners at a healthcare union, which does invest in in education, all sorts of educational programming to help their members. And they've realized that English skills will help a whole constituency get access to further training and development. And it's the same with adult literacy in general. If we can help people get the skills they need to advocate for themselves, then they'll be able to participate in the type of workforce training that's going to lead to family sustaining wages. Um, 80% of our learners can navigate life better as a result of this investment in English literacy.
Yeah, that navigating life piece I found really, really interesting as well and aligned to what we found in our survey. Over 50% of the respondents we surveyed said, building confidence was their number one reason for wanting to pursue additional learning. So that piece is so important that even though they are learning English, just building skills and feeling like, yes, I can do this is a huge part of the benefit and not always one that's easy to measure. I think
No.
your last
Yeah.
slide.
Um, and this is just pointing that investing in English skills is a workforce development strategy. And it's one that we're seeing more and more organizations invest in. And I actually There might be one more slide. Let's see. Because I think this we had an ROI slide. No, we took it out. But I can share a report later that shows that when local economies invest in English upskilling, for every dollar invested, they get $6 back, which is really why we're doing this work. It's getting funded because it pays for itself, but it's also helping a huge population of workers who are already in the United States doing really hard work, taking care of their families, participating in their communities, do it in a way that is more effective, that is more beneficial to their children, that is more beneficial to our economy.
Amazing. Well, we're going to turn off the slides. Thank you for that overview. We will absolutely be sharing the report. It's probably in the chat, and if not, it will be part of the follow-up notes. So we're just going to turn it over and have a conversation, but I welcome people to ask any questions they have directly in the Q&A. If you put it in the chat, we'll do our best to answer, but if you put it in the Q&A, we'll definitely be able to see it and access it. So please feel free to ask questions as you go. So just to get started, the first set of questions is really about skills and learner impact. I love the specificity of the phrase English upskilling. I feel like it is very crisp and helpful when we're trying to convey the need to support English learners. Can you talk a little bit about the distinction between English language learning, like maybe how we've done this, in our adult ed system as is, and English language learning for work? My background is also in bilingual education and ESL and working with new immigrant youth. And you just know, like, the more relevant it is to the person's life, the better. But can you talk a little bit about that phrase, English upskilling, and what you mean by English learning via EnGen?
Yes, and I will also say that I started out as an ESL teacher where what we were doing was definitely not English upskilling geared for the workforce. Like language teachers in the United States are taught to teach language as a subject. It's not generally integrated into anything else, and it's usually not relevant at all, which is why most people here have taken years and years of language class and can't really say anything. And the
Mm-hmm.
reason why we started talking about English upskilling is because it truly is a workforce skill, and we need to think about it that way. We need to start with what do our adults need to be able to do in English, and let's work backwards. And so it comes out of a whole language learning framework called task-based language teaching, when you start with the actual tasks that your learners need to accomplish. And any adults in an ESL class, in an adult literacy class, have a long list of things that they need to be able to accomplish. They need to enroll their kids in school. They need to be able to sign into the payroll system at work. They need to be able to understand the contract they signed for their cell phone. They need to be able to take a certification exam to go back to the career they had from the country that they were in before they came to the US. And those are all very different things. So we need to personalize the instruction as much as possible and start with the actual skills people need to do what they want to be able to do. And I know you know as a teacher that if you get that spark, if the learner sees that what they're doing is something that will help them outside of the classroom, they are much more likely to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember it when one of my first jobs in the adult ed space was as a workforce development coordinator for new immigrant learners. And I realized when they got their first paycheck, just deciphering what is on the paycheck was a whole lesson. And I actually made that part of our training to read the paycheck and understand the different components, how you break down taxes and all of that. I mean, I had to learn it as well, but it was combo financial literacy and English and math, right? So that integrated approach is so powerful.
It's
Um,
how we learn everything. We don't break
yeah.
complex skills down into components like that. You don't teach someone to like I don't know, kick a ball by having them first just look at the ball and then just kick and not kick the ball. Like you try to get them as close as possible to the target task as quickly as possible, or else you lose them.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. So I know in English learning, we always talk about the value of conversations, interpersonal connection, face to face, as a need to build language skills and competence, communicative competence, if you will. EnGen is primarily a digital tool, right? For all of us out there that are like, but wait a minute, where is the person on the other side? How can you build language skills without people? Could you share a little bit more about, the online experience of language learning and how EnGen kind of mitigates that through the platform?
Yes. Sure. Well, first of all, you have to have people, you have to have communication. Humans want to communicate with other humans. And so that's a super important part of developing language skills. But also, learners need to see many examples of the language that they're learning. They need to read examples of the language they're learning. They need to watch videos. They need to observe people using the language because that's a necessary but insufficient component of language learning. So, our platform is designed to give every learner individualized access to the content that is most relevant for them, videos of the exact tasks they want to be able to accomplish, the chance to go back and read texts at their level on the right topic. And also, it incorporates a lot of communication. When we're working with an employer and we're providing like an end-to-end comprehensive solution, we have multilingual learner success coaches who help learners understand their short-term goals, their medium-term goals, their long-term goals. We have teachers teaching small group classes and larger workshops and private classes. We have places for learners to come and practice with each other. And when we're working with an adult education program or an adult school or a community college, then those interactive pieces are handled by those teachers and those faculty members. And we're providing the really personalized, specific curriculum and input that gives learners the examples they need so they know what to say. And there have been so in the last 2 years, we've had an explosion of tools with the ubiquitousness of things like ChatGPT and large language models and generative AI, and all of this stuff is amazing for language learning. But there are a couple of caveats. Like we do now have computers that can sound like people, so they're great for learners to practice with, and we are piloting software that lets learners practice chatting. But learners still need examples of authentic input. We can't just tell the computer to simulate a conversation with the learner and the learner has no idea what to say. So we
Mhm.
need to have a combination of places for learners to get real examples of the language they're using, and then places for learners to practice in a scaffolded way with AI and also with people. It's all part of the solution. And what we've always tried to do is use computers for what technology can do best, so people can do what humans do best. So we're never going to not have the human component. What the humans do best is going to change as what the technology can do best gets more sophisticated. But as a guiding instructional design principle, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make it so that people can get as much rich practice with language as rapidly as possible so that they can go do real things in the real world.
Mhm. Right. And then when you survey people, they're not saying, I increased so many vocabulary skills
Right.
or able to conjugate verbs better. They're saying I have more confidence, I can communicate better. So,
Exactly. And,
uh,
and we're getting them ready to do it at work. And I don't know how many people watching speak another language, but doing things in another language is really, really hard because
mhm,
you speak your first language fluently. You're an expert in it. You use it without thought. You just sit down and have a conversation. When you need to use your second language, you sound like a fool usually because you don't know what all the words are. You forget how to conjugate things. You start to get nervous. And so that feeling on top of not knowing what you're doing when you first get started is really, really hard for adults, especially in the workplace where you want to look like you know what you're doing. And so what we do is we help learners get the confidence they need to practice so that they can then go practice at work. And then it just snowballs and it works super efficiently.
amazing. So according to your report, the survey respondents come from dozens of countries and speak more than 4 dozen languages other than English. So that's an impressive sample of immigrant origin adults using this tool. Could you describe the population of English learners that EnGen best serves? I know, for example, at the beginning we were talking about how many learners are coming in, at lower levels of literacy. Would this tool work for them too? Or like who is kind of
It
the
does.
the
So
population?
we can work with learners at any English ability level and any literacy level. I will say that when you're working with adults who have emerging literacy skills, who don't speak any English yet, and who are hesitant with technology, it works best if you can get started with them in a more high touch way. So we have programs where there are volunteers or teachers or case managers where somebody can sit down with someone and help them get started. But we have content for pre-beginning literacy, beginning literacy, helping people like use the language skills necessary to get an email address where you're really just like focusing on individual letters and keys on the keyboard. Again, all that stuff, the very early stages it's easier on the learner if they have some more support. But we can do a lot of that at a distance. So I've seen really successful programs where somebody has a Zoom coach who speaks their language, who can explain how this is going to work and explain that there's going to be some trial and error and this is what it's going to look like. And that if you just get started a little bit and you only understand 4 words, that's more than you knew yesterday. Because some of learning a new language is just being okay with not understanding everything as you're putting it together.
Yeah.
Adults Children learn their first language implicitly, and adults learn their second language with a combination of explicit learning and also implicit learning. So some of the learning is just giving you a chance to practice listening and using it and finding things and not necessarily being aware of every single thing that you're learning.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I understand too, like, you're starting to explore the use of EnGen for English speakers or US
We
born.
are. Well, we see it happen. So there's like I said before, there's a lot of crossover in adult basic education programs and adult learning programs where you have people who are native English speakers, but who just have low literacy skills. And when our platform is being used for intermediate level English learners, there's a lot of overlap between the types of sentence structures and the shorter texts, but all combined with a really workplace focused content that is useful for learners in those fields. And it's also the case that because so much of adult learning is contextually, I started this my sentence the wrong way, but adults learn better when what they're learning is in a context that they understand. Helping adults with emerging literacy skills in a workplace context where they already have some of the background knowledge, they probably already know some of the sight words. There's some of the learning that they've already used in the workplace that basically gives them a boost when they're working on their new skills.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's sort of the idea of universal design, right? If you are designing for a certain group that may need more support, it actually helps everybody develop those skills. So I have just maybe one or two more questions for you because I want to get to the growing number of questions in the Q&A, and some of these are really great. So I want to make sure we have time for that. In terms of design, there's a lot of stuff out there, right? We're overwhelmed with platforms and content and, work stuff. And I don't know, the last 10 years have been how many workforce preparation things going on. Could you share a little bit about how EnGen really works to adapt their curriculum for industry specific areas like healthcare, manufacturing? I've seen some of the ones for food service, um, and more, really.
And it goes back to what I said before. We always start with what is the task that our learners need to accomplish. So for healthcare, we have programs where we're helping people get certified as CNAs as a first step towards a stackable credential that would ultimately lead to like an LVN certification credential. We start with what learners need to be able to do on those tests and then work backwards. So they're really getting the English skills that they need to be able to pass that exam. It's the same with food safety. We looked at the Serve Safe exam that learners need to take, and we figured out how to give them the English skills that they would need to be able to take that exam. We've done it with high school credentials. We've done it with the NCLEX. There are so many foreign trained nurses in the United States who need to pass basically the boards to become certified in the US. Many of them speak English, but they don't have the technical English skills to pass that nursing exam in English. So we focus on that for them, for commercial driver's licenses, for clean energy, for solar panel installers. Like we've gone and we've had the privilege of working with state governments, with employers to be able to create really, really specific content because we can look and see what learners need to do to get from the entry level job they have now to the next job in that organization and how to give them the English skills they need to be successful.
Okay, that's very helpful. So can you give a more explicit example of an employer that you've worked with and, that process for designing with that employer in mind?
Sure. So a couple of really great examples. One of them is with Chobani, where we were able to create the English skills that you need to work safely in a yogurt manufacturing context. Like we can truly start with the language skills that make sense for the employer. We did the same thing with
Wow.
with the Gap. And what we do is we look at what are the materials these workers interact with? What do they need to see when they're learning the safety instructions? And what do they need to do to be able to get to the next job in this organization? And we'll use those internal training materials to create the language learning materials. So none of it is scripted. And truthfully, none of it is stuff that Chat GPT could develop because ChatGPT could help, but we need to start with the actual examples of what people need to say in the workplace, and then we work backwards from there.
Great. And I know over the last couple of years, I've seen more and more EnGen partnering with more public entities or states or different,
Yes.
so beyond employers. Could you share a little bit about some of those partnerships and what that looks like and how it's different from
Sure.
working with an employer?
Well, we had just announced last week a partnership, a relaunch of our partnership with the state of Colorado. We worked with them 2 years ago on a really large scale initiative that helped all new Coloradoans get access to English skills, whether they were employed, whether they were working in workforce development programs. We ended up working with small and medium-sized employers, lots of community organizations, all working to help English learners get very workforce-focused skills for the state. That project actually invested in 10 different career pathway programs for
Oh,
that state for jobs that are in demand, which is a really important point to make here. And it's one that I got to speak about last week on a webinar where we had representatives from the state of Maine Department of Education and the state of Maine Department of Labor, because the state of Maine has also made a similar investment. And it's not just investing in English upskilling, it's thinking about how does English upskilling fit into the workforce ecosystem in our state? What are the in-demand roles that employers are struggling to hire for? What are the language skills we need for those roles? Are there any certifications we need? And then what happens next? And then it's working with everybody in the state, whoever's working on job skilling for job seekers, whoever's working on training for incumbent workers at employers, and making sure that everyone is rowing in the same direction to try to get people the language skills they need to get into those roles. And so, yes, state of Michigan is a great example, state of Maine is a great example, and the state of Colorado, a great example of this work.
awesome. All right, so I'm gonna go and ask some of the questions that are here in the Q&A. If we don't get to all of your questions, we'll absolutely have opportunity to follow up. So please send your questions over to me directly and I can get them to Katie or vice versa. And I'm gonna save a few minutes at the end for you to talk about the new Powering Potential Network. So first, we're gonna ask a few questions from the chat. So, or the Q&A, I should say. One person asked, sorry. Okay, I lost my place. Okay. One person asked, could you talk a little bit about ways that adult education programs on the ground are using EnGen in their classes? Like give an example of what that might look like. So is there an instructor portal or a way that you could use EnGen for a flipped classroom?
Yeah, so we have done a lot of professional development work to help adult educators use EnGen. All of that is available on our site. And I think I have a couple of colleagues on the call who can share the link. The most comprehensive one was one that I did last fall, where I worked with adult educators to start with their own adult education wherever they are. Are they in a statewide system? Are they in one specific location? And try to figure out what industry recognized credential does their adult education program offer that would be a good fit for their English learners? And then can they work backwards to make sure that their adult ESOL or ESL class is actually preparing learners with the skills they need to get that credential? And then how to do it in a flipped way. And so, yes, we have a ton of resources to help adult educators think about flipping their classrooms, flipping their programs, and making sure that what they're doing is helping people get the English skills they need for the jobs that they want to be able to get.
Yeah, that reminds me, one of my roles was pushing into electrical installation courses to support English instruction in the CTE. And so often the students that were coming from other countries, they already knew how to do electrical installation, but they didn't have the English language to match with it. So that was a good example where EnGen may have really helped.
Exactly, and we do that work with CTE programs all the time, and sometimes what happens is learners can use EnGen on their own to get the language skills to then participate in the CTE program. So there are vocational transition programs. Emily Griffith Technical College in Colorado has one. The Peninsula Regional Education Program in Virginia has one where learners are able to work with teachers and also the EnGen platform, get their English skills in a specific vocation up, and then transition into the CTE program that will get them the credential. And as you said, often they have the technical skills already, but they need the English skills to go with the technical skills.
Yeah, so on that, many of us are thinking, and there's a few questions about this in the chat, you know, getting a better job or higher pay or career advancement, these are really big gains. And I think you said like 80% or something even higher achieve that. What does it take? How much time do they spend on NGen on average? Like, what's the recommended dose or, way to interact with NGen to make gains?
I get that question all the time, and the truth is that it depends.
Yeah.
We recommend learners spend a minimum of an hour a week in our platform, and that's because in order to get an hour of time counted, they spend up spending more time. That's an hour like of doing activities and answering questions. Um, but truly, some learners will spend many more hours, 6, 7, 8 hours a week sometimes, and some will spend less because what they're getting in the platform are the skills they need to then go use English at work. And
Mhm.
we can't tell if they're talking to their colleagues and talking to their boss and getting practice, then coming back and spending 20 minutes doing a couple of lessons that give them examples of the language they want to then go use in the workplace. So what we found with thousands and hundreds of thousands of learners is that 1 hour per week, we can pretty much guarantee that the learners will make proficiency gains. Some are going to spend a lot more, but that's enough because they're in an English rich environment. There are people all over the US where the learners can practice using English. We just need to give them what they need to then go get that practice.
That makes sense. And one of the questions is more technical for the ESL, like the real ESL people in the room. Some people have questions about comprehensible input, right? And the design of this tool, and is language teaching the same as upskilling? So could you talk a little bit about like how
Sure.
does NGen make sure we have comprehensible input?
So we think about learners' proficiency, even though it's on a continuum, we think about it in levels, and those levels match the Common European Framework of Reference. They've been mapped to the NRS levels. You have like pre-beginner learners who have zero English skills, and then you have beginners and high beginners. We break intermediate into 3 different levels, and then when you get to advanced, there's low advanced and expert. We make sure that learners are getting exposed to content that is at their proficiency level.
Okay.
So it is going to be comprehensible because it is going to be plus or minus their own proficiency level, which will mean that they'll understand most of it, but not all of it, because that's how they develop language skills. Like if everything is at your level, then your skills plateau. That's what like, you can go to the gym and do the same thing every day, and if you never change it, you never make it harder, you'll maintain your level of fitness, but you're not going to increase it, and it's the same with your proficiency. If you understand everything that you're reading and listening to, then your level will never change. We need to make it more difficult for you if we want to push you so that you can do things like manipulate the hypothetical third person conditional and understand words in a domain that you don't already understand. And so that's what our platform tries to do. It adapts in multiple ways and it delivers content that's contextually relevant and personalized because the content is leveled. We're not adapting the content to be available for lower level learners. It's something I get asked all the time. Like, can you make an advanced manufacturing course for beginners? And it's like, no. Like, the beginners need to acquire English skills. We can give them something that's at their level that is, important to understand before you get into manufacturing. They could be working on workplace safety. They could be working on the language skills you need for like general workplace interactions, and then once they get to like a low intermediate level, then they can start working with the advanced manufacturing content that's been chunked, that has had keywords glossed. So we're taking authentic materials and giving learners the resources they need to understand them. And we're also finding a sequence of authentic materials that makes sense for the language learners.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So staying with this on the language learner experience, like how does it work? Do they download it to their phone? Do they use it on a desktop? Could you talk a little
Any
bit?
of those things. Yeah.
Okay.
So learners, so we have apps for Android and for iOS. They can download an app and do everything on their phone. They can do it on a tablet. They can do it on the computer. It's, they don't need to only use one device. They have a login and a password, and when they have that, they can log in anywhere, and it will know exactly where they left off. It will be at the right level, and they'll be enrolled in the content that makes the most sense for them.
Okay, great. And who pays for it? I think some people have a question of like, who does can a learner individually download and pay for it?
Learners don't individually download and pay for it. It's either sponsored by their employer, and employers often pay for this as part of a workplace benefit. So it's part of like their benefits package, access to a workplace education. So you used to hear about like tuition reimbursement programs where people would have their employers pay for them to go back to school and finish their associate's degree or bachelor's degree or get a master's degree. This is sort of the same idea. There are many, many large employers that will pay upfront for foundational benefits for learners, like English upskilling and also high school completion when they have learners who need high school degrees. It's also paid for by state governments. I think we put something in the chat about the state of Colorado, but like I said before, Maine, Michigan, Colorado, um, all are paying for English upskilling through the State Department of Labor dollars. Sometimes it's done through State Department of Education. In Massachusetts, we work with the Department of Adult Education. Often community colleges will purchase this on behalf of learners. Adult education programs will purchase it on behalf of learners.
Wow. Okay, great.
There
Um,
are lots of ways to get something like this funded. And the fact that we track all of our outcomes means that you can report it back to whoever is funding this. But this is truly a workforce investment. And so it should be paid for with the types of dollars that we use to pay for workforce investments.
mhm. Great question. I have like two more, possibly three more, and then we're gonna talk about the powering potential network. So I want to make sure we get that in. Does EnGen help at all with pronunciation? I love the brass tacks questions from the ESL group. It's great.
It does. So that's that question probably we could spend a lot more time answering because we work on comprehensibility. Learners are always going to have accents. Yo hablo español y yo tengo un acento. If you learn a language as an adult, you are going to have an accent. We have accents for our first languages. Accents are something that are
I know
ubiquitous.
I try to mask mine daily, but it doesn't always
But
work.
and I think for a long time, people were talking about accent reduction and having learners try to sound like native speakers. Those things will never happen. Those are not the goal. The goal is for learners to be understood by fluent speakers, for people to understand what they're saying, for people to have the confidence to use their language skills. So yes, we work on comprehensibility. We actually have a whole exercise in our platform where learners get feedback on where they're putting primary lexical stress, which we know is the single biggest contributor to comprehensibility. The way that the English language works, we reduce vowel sounds in unstressed syllables. And so we want to make sure that the learners know which syllables to stress because that helps people understand what they're talking about. We have small group classes. We have a pronunciation workshop series where learners can come and get practice with pronunciation. And we're actually piloting some new activities now that are using much more sophisticated speech recognition to give learners more feedback on how close they are to being understood.
Mhm. Great. And one more question, because I feel like that you've addressed, there was a few questions related to like equity and comprehension and making sure that the program is adaptable, but I feel like some of those have been addressed, but maybe get a little bit more into this idea of like a standard grammar, or talk a little bit about like what kind of English are you helping people acquire?
We want people
Like,
to
is that
acquire.
part of your idea?
Yeah, it's that, and I looked at the chat quickly and I saw something in there about learners being confused by non-standard language or contractions or words that are only used in spoken English. But we need to teach language learners all those things because that's what they're going to encounter when they go
Yeah.
out into the wild. So it's much better to give them examples of real people using English and have them ask a question about it. And that's where teachers come in. So
Yeah.
the teachers that we have will ask any learner question on any topic about something that's confusing. We love it. And I'm sure you remember this from when you were a teacher. When a learner notices something and thinks they found a mistake or they have a question, that's the best. Then you can talk about it. Then they've been paying attention. Then they can understand that, like, oh, this person had a strong New York accent and that's why they said this, but this is what it would sound like
Yes.
somewhere else. But we are a huge country and English is the language that is used predominantly all over the world. There's so many different kinds of English. There's so many different accents that it's better to let learners notice things that are strange, watch them over and over again, ask their questions, and it is to try to change everything to be very simplified. Because when you do that, then learners go out and they're totally unprepared to speak to real people.
Yeah, great point. I completely agree. And even within the workplace, there's different Englishes that they're going to hear.
And we all hear things as fluent English speakers. You will miss something that someone said and say, I'm sorry, can you repeat that? Or what did you say? Or I missed what you just said. And often, as language learners, we don't want to do that because we don't want people to think we don't know what they're talking about. So, when you're living and working in your second language, you get very used to nodding and trying to figure out what's going on and like pretending you understand when you don't, because adults don't like to look like they don't know what's happening. That is a terrible feeling. And one of the things we need to get our language learners to do is to say, I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Can you repeat that? Can you say that one more time? Because that will give them the skills and the practice to not need to ask that so many times.
I think we've all been in that situation. I've been in some policy calls. I'm like, excuse me, what? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think that you make a great point that that's part of the communicative competence and the confidence to be able to say, I didn't quite understand that. Can you explain?
Can you please repeat that? Yes, and also, if you're listening to something in your second language and you just get lost for a second, it's like it's completely gone. Like you don't know
Yeah.
where you are. You need to be able to say, like, we need to go back. Please stop. Please say that again. Because if it's your first language and this is all you've been listening to your whole life, if you stop paying attention, you might be able to like figure out what someone's talking about and get back in. But you that's really hard to do in your second language. And so we need to give learners the skills to ask for what they need so they can get that rich practice. Because if you're sitting in a class or you're in a conversation and someone is talking to you and you don't understand what they're saying at all, that is a waste of everyone's time because it's not helping you.
Great. Okay. We just have one more question. And I apologize. There's some still good questions in
I'll
the
get back to them. If you can
chat.
send us all the questions that we didn't answer, my team will either I'll answer them, I'll have a colleague answer them, we'll get back to you for sure.
Okay, great. And so one of the questions is about digital skills, which we had talked a little bit about at the beginning, that learners have said using EnGen has both increased their English and digital skills. Could you talk a little bit about the type of digital skills needed to use EnGen? Because we know that this is a challenge, although in my own research through All In and other work that I've done previously, almost everyone has some type of digital skills. And even if they're not confident in every area, most people are using some technology in some way. So could you give a little bit more on what kind of digital skills needed to do this
Sure.
work? Like, are they
So
typing long responses or?
they're not typing long responses and they can if they can download the app, then it's all very like touch screen, drag and drop. They don't have to do anything really complicated. And we actually have a whole digital literacy pathway where they watch videos of people doing more complicated digital skills, you know, joining Zoom meetings and closing browser
Oh,
windows and but they watch videos of this and answer questions about it and then they can go do it themselves later. So we built it in that way. The truth is that every single job requires like, there isn't a job that doesn't require digital skills. You have to put your timesheet in. I don't think anybody very few places are you punching a paper time clock. You need to have some sort of go into some sort of employee portal, even if it's once a year to get your benefits. And so by teaching people to download an app and do the work in the app and then go to the website on the computer, they're able to use those skills in other areas of their life.
mhm. Great.
And adults and I often get questions about older adults, people saying like, "Oh, well, I only teach people who are over the age of 60." And honestly, we did an analysis looking at learners' ages. The older adults had better engagement overall than some of the younger ones. And I think it's because they really, really wanted to learn. They were grateful for the opportunity and they took it seriously. And so they went in and spent more time and improved their skills. We have thousands and thousands of learner success stories because when we do this survey work and we ask them these questions, they write to us and they tell us their stories. We have so many learners in their 40s, 50s, 60s who are after sometimes after a long time in the US, getting English skills and going back to career pathways that they had in other countries or that they wanted to explore here.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. So I want to give you a couple of minutes. EnGen has just launched the Powering Potential Network. Could you tell us a little bit about what this is and how people in the audience or any of us may be able to get involved?
Yes, and this came out of so many conversations at conferences across the country where we would get together with adult educators, with state workforce leaders, with employers, and have these really rich conversations about what's working. And then I wanted there to be something to do after that. When we know that like in the state of Maine, Department of Education and Department of Labor work closely together to build career pathways, that's a really great model. Other states should be able to replicate that. So our Powering Potential Network is basically we collected everybody who's interested in this ecosystem approach work to building workforce pipelines of English learners and collected them all together so that we can have webinars, we can promote events like the one that we're doing today. When we are going to bring together a convening in a local area or a region, we can let people know to try to have conversations that solve real problems. And I think my colleagues are posting in the chat how you can find out more information and join.
Yes, we'll definitely be saving this chat. I've been trying to follow. There's been some really good conversation in here. And I guess the last, sort of discussion point that we haven't really addressed is like the current ecosystem that we're in. I mean, the administration released an English only, you know,
Mandate,
executive, yeah.
executive order.
I was trying to think of the word, executive order, and then at the same time has not increased investment in English language instruction for adult ed. And we're even a little worried about Title III funding in the K through 12 system, right? So there hasn't really been a match and investment in English as a workforce skill. So could you share any tips or messaging that you've been using to connect with people that maybe don't align or right away understand why English is so beneficial for our communities and for our workforce?
Um, so this is where I really always like to talk about English skills helping to create a superpower. Like
Mm,
often we talk about English learners like they are a problem to be solved, but the truth is that they are all multilingual. And
mm,
one thing that the United States needs more of is more people who can speak more languages. And
yes.
all of our English learners have the potential to be bilingual, trilingual, multilingual, offering customer service in multiple languages, offering healthcare in multiple languages, offering early childhood education in multiple languages, which you as a bilingual educator know is incredibly important and has lifelong benefits.
And my son got in the Spanish immersion lottery. He's not happy about it, but I am. So he's
Congratulations,
over
felicidades. No,
it.
it's true. And so the more we think about multilingualism as something that we need to cultivate, the better I think it is for including the multilingual workforce in all of these important conversations because we need to have more people who speak more languages.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're spending tons of money through Department of Defense and other to teach languages, and yet
Yes.
we're not thinking about the resources that we already have through the communities that we have that are
Right,
here.
and I think the accent piece is one that's why we try so hard to talk about how everyone has an accent. Because if you look like me and you start speaking Spanish, everyone's like, "Oh, wow, it's so amazing you speak Spanish." And I'm like, "There are millions of people in the United States who speak Spanish and also English and also other languages, and they're just as impressive." Like learning a second language is super impressive, and we should all be trying to encourage as many people as possible to speak all of the languages.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's such an important point. Yes, and ratio, how do you pronounce that? Ratiolinguistics. Thank you so much. I think this is a really important point that who is speaking English is definitely part of the conversation, right? That it's not just about workforce, but about thinking of creating more inclusive, more dynamic, more equitable communities and language being a part of that piece. So thank you, Dr. Katie Brown. I'm telling you, having reviewed many products in my time, education technology products, and used many products, it is so rare to have like true educators and community leaders design products. So we're just very excited to feature this one and talk through on All In Learning Series. So for all of you out there, thank you for joining. If you're not following All In already, please follow us on LinkedIn as well as EnGen. Sign up for our newsletters. We're going to take a pause in July because everybody needs a break, 2025 especially. So we're going to start up again in August and talk about our next session will be on planning for Adult Education and Family Literacy Week. So hopefully we'll have more information on the IELC funding, which we didn't get to on that note too. So thank you again, Katie, and thanks everybody for joining and a hot day in June.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, everybody. This was really fun.